Last week, my doctor looked over my blood work, smiled, tapped the chart with his pen, and said something I never expected. "Whatever you've been doing, keep doing it." Hearing those words felt good, but what surprised me even more was why he said them. Because for almost 4 years, I ended every single day with one habit I honestly believed was helping me. I thought it was good for my heart. I thought it helped me sleep. I trusted it so completely that I never questioned it. Looking back now, I wish I had. It wasn't until I finally let go of that habit that everything else started to make sense. So today, I want to tell you the part of the story I left out before, the piece that changed everything. When my daughter convinced me to switch to sprouted grains, I felt like I'd finally turned a corner. Breakfast no longer left me exhausted. That heavy feeling that used to hit around 10 in the morning, it was gone for the first time in a long while. I could finish breakfast, clean up the kitchen, and still have enough energy to enjoy the rest of the morning. Naturally, I thought I'd figured it out. I told myself, well, that must have been the problem. But after a few weeks, something still wasn't right. My fasting blood sugar made no sense. One morning, it looked perfectly normal. The next morning, it jumped much higher, even though I'd eaten the same meals and followed the same routine. I kept looking for answers. I cut out the little bit of fruit I was still eating. I wondered if the sprouted beans were somehow affecting me. Some mornings, I even stood in the kitchen staring at my glucose meter, wondering whether this was simply what getting older looked like. The more I tried to explain it, the less it added up. What frustrated me most wasn't seeing a high number, it was seeing no pattern at all. Somewhere, something wasn't fitting, and I couldn't find it. What I didn't realize was that I was searching in the wrong part of the day. Every morning, I focused on breakfast. Every afternoon, I thought about lunch. I never stopped to think about what happened just before I went to bed. That's where the real answer had been waiting all along. The answer was waiting for me every night. It was a single glass of red wine. After my wife passed away, the house changed in ways I never expected. The daytime wasn't so bad. There were errands to run, neighbors to wave at, cars passing outside. The world kept moving. But once the sun went down, everything became very quiet. Too quiet. I'd turn off the television, climb into bed, and suddenly, the silence seemed louder than any sound. You notice things you never paid attention to before. The old clock in the hallway, the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, even your own breathing. And the harder I tried to fall asleep, the more awake I felt. That's when the evening glass of wine became part of my routine. Just one small glass. I wasn't drinking to get drunk. At least that's not how I saw it. Friends my age had been saying the same thing for years. Little red wine is good for the heart. It helps you relax. You'll sleep better. It sounded reasonable, so I believed it. And to be fair, it seemed to work. Within minutes, my shoulders felt lighter. The worries that followed me into bed became quieter. The loneliness faded, just enough for me to close my eyes. Every night, I poured that same glass, without giving it a second thought. I wasn't chasing the taste. I was chasing the feeling of finally being able to rest. When you're lying awake, night after night, you'll hold on to almost anything that promises a little peace. At least I did. What I didn't realize was that the comfort I looked forward to every evening was quietly creating a problem I wouldn't notice until the middle of the night. It happened so regularly that I could almost set a clock by it. Around 3 in the morning, I'd wake up all at once, not slowly, not naturally. I'd bolt upright in bed, my heart pounding so hard. It felt like it was echoing through the room. My pajamas were damp with sweat. My hands shook. For a few moments, I'd just sit there on the edge of the bed, trying to catch my breath. The digital clock beside me glowed in the darkness. 3:02, 3:05. Sometimes I'd stare at those numbers for what felt like forever, waiting for my heartbeat to settle down. When you're alone in a quiet house, moments like that can feel much bigger than they really are. Your mind starts asking questions you don't want to answer. Is this serious? Should I call someone? Is this what a heart attack feels like? Then I'd think about my daughter. She worked full-time. She had a 4-year-old to take care of. The last thing I wanted was for my phone call in the middle of the night to send her rushing across town because her old dad couldn't catch his breath. So I never called. I simply waited. Eventually, my heartbeat slowed. The sweating stopped. I'd drink a little water, sit quietly for another few minutes, then crawl back into bed and hope morning came quickly. After a while, I stopped treating those episodes as something unusual. I started making excuses for them. Maybe I'd eaten too many carbohydrates. Maybe I'd walked farther than usual. Maybe this was simply part of getting older. I could come up with plenty of explanations, just not the right one. It never crossed my mind that the glass of wine sitting on the kitchen counter, the habit I trusted most, might have anything to do with it, not once. A few weeks later, my daughter came over with my granddaughter. It was one of those rainy weekends when nobody was in a hurry to be anywhere. She offered to help me clean out a few cabinets and throw away some old things under the kitchen sink. That's when she found them, the empty wine bottles. There weren't hundreds of them, but there were enough that she paused for a second. She looked at them. Then she looked at me. She didn't sound angry. She sounded concerned. Very quietly, she asked, "Dad, when did you start drinking by yourself?" I immediately tried to explain. It's only one glass. It's for my heart. It helps me sleep. The words came out so naturally that I realized I'd been repeating them to myself for years. She didn't argue. She didn't tell me I was wrong. She simply nodded. The conversation moved on, but I could tell she was thinking about it. Later that afternoon, while my granddaughter was playing in the living room, my daughter sat on the couch with her phone. She spent a long time reading, article after article. Every now and then she'd stop, scroll back, and keep reading. Finally, she walked over and sat beside me. She turned the screen toward me. "Dad," she said, "I think these nighttime episodes and those strange morning numbers might actually be connected." She had come across something called the Somogyi effect, one possible explanation for overnight low blood sugar, followed by a rebound rise by morning. Then she explained it in a way I could actually understand. She said, "Imagine your liver is working the night shift. When alcohol is in your system, clearing it away becomes the priority. While it's busy doing that, it may not release glucose into your bloodstream as steadily as your body normally expects overnight." That simple explanation made me stop and think. She continued, "If your blood sugar drops too low while you're sleeping, your body reacts like it's facing an emergency. It releases stress hormones. That's what can make you wake up sweating with your heart racing. And afterward, your body may release extra stored glucose, which could explain why your fasting numbers are so high the next morning." I just sat there, staring at her phone. The room was quiet. Outside, I could hear the rain tapping softly against the windows. Suddenly, all those confusing mornings, all those frightening nights, they no longer felt like separate problems. For the first time, they seemed connected. I remembered how certain I'd been that the wine was helping me. Now, I couldn't stop wondering if I'd been making things harder on myself. All along, getting rid of the wine wasn't difficult. Breaking the routine was, especially when you've repeated the same habit almost every night for years. That first evening felt unusually long. Dinner ended. The dishes were washed. The house had become quiet again, almost automatically. I found myself looking toward the cabinet, where the bottle had always been. It was empty. I went to bed anyway. Sleep didn't come. I turned over, adjusted the pillow, closed my eyes, opened them again. The clock kept ticking. The silence I'd been trying to escape all those years came rushing back. Without the wine, there was nothing covering it up. Every memory seemed louder. Every regret found its way into the room. I thought about getting up more than once. I even reached toward the bedside lamp, already knowing exactly where I'd walk. If there had still been a bottle in the kitchen, then I stopped. Not because I suddenly felt strong, because I remembered those nights at 3 o'clock, the pounding heart, the cold sweat, the fear of becoming another emergency phone call. My daughter would have to answer. That thought was enough to keep me in bed. The first few nights weren't about determination. They were about choosing which discomfort I was willing to live with. A restless night, or another frightening one. Neither choice felt easy, but one of them gave me a chance to wake up healthier the next morning. So I stayed in bed. I listened to the quiet. I watched the ceiling slowly brighten as morning came. I barely slept that night, but I didn't pour another glass. A few days later, my daughter stopped by again. The moment she saw me, she smiled a little and said, "You look tired." She wasn't wrong. Those first nights without the wine had caught up with me. I probably looked like I hadn't slept in a week. She set a small box on the kitchen table, organic, unsweetened chamomile tea. I've been reading about different ways people unwind before bed, she said. I thought, you could try this. Then she added something simple that stayed with me. Don't just lie there fighting sleep. If you can't sleep, get up for a few minutes. Boil some water. Make yourself a cup of tea. Give your mind something gentle to focus on. That night, I gave it a try. Instead of reaching for a wine glass, I filled the kettle. The kitchen sounded different. No cork being pulled. Just the soft bubbling of water coming to a boil. I wrapped both hands around the warm mug and sat quietly at the table. The tea didn't make me sleepy right away. It wasn't like the wine. There was no sudden wave of relaxation, no numb feeling, just a light, earthy aroma drifting up with the steam. For a while, I simply sat there. I watched the steam disappear into the dim kitchen light, little by little. My thoughts stopped racing. Some nights, I still needed half an hour before I felt sleepy. On the difficult nights, it took closer to an hour. But something important had started to change. One morning, I woke up and realized something was missing. I hadn't opened my eyes at 3 o'clock. No pounding heart, no cold sweat, no sitting on the edge of the bed, wondering what was happening. I'd slept through the night. The next surprise came when I checked my fasting blood sugar. The numbers that had confused me for months had begun moving back in the right direction. Not overnight, not perfectly, but steadily enough that I noticed the difference. That happened just before my follow-up appointment. By then, 2 changes had become part of my routine. Sprouted grains in the morning, no wine at night. When my doctor reviewed my chart, he looked at the number, smiled, tapped the paper with his pen and said, "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." Of course, he also reminded me that everyone's health is different, and what worked for me isn't a substitute for personal medical advice. Still, hearing those words felt like confirmation that I was finally moving in the right direction. I'm 82 now. There isn't a bottle of wine anywhere in my house. Just a few boxes of tea waiting in the cabinet. Looking back, I don't feel embarrassed that I believed I was making a healthy choice. I did what many people do. I listened to advice from friends. I trusted something I'd heard over and over again. And once it became part of my routine, I stopped questioning it. That's probably the lesson I'll carry with me the longest. Sometimes the habits we trust the most deserve another look. Not because they're always wrong, but because our bodies change. The things that suited us 10 or 20 years ago may not suit us today. I've learned that changing your mind isn't a sign of failure. Sometimes it's simply part of growing older wisely. If making one difficult change helps me stay healthier, keeps me independent, and saves my daughter from worrying every time the phone rings late at night, I'd say it's well worth it. Getting older has taught me that good habits aren't just the ones we keep. Sometimes they're the ones we're willing to let go of. I'm curious, have you ever discovered that something you thought was helping you really wasn't? Or maybe you found a bedtime routine that genuinely helps you rest. If you'd like to share, I'd love to read about it in the comments. I spend more time there than you might think. For someone living in a quiet house, hearing other people's stories makes it feel a little less quiet. Thank you for spending these minutes with me. Take good care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next video.